Hello, my name is Jack. Welcome back to my vault. Most crimes leave evidence. A body, a weapon, a witness. But the crime I am bringing you today left 12,000 pages of evidence. Reports, photographs, patient records, and the United States government still hid it for 60 years. What you are about to hear is not a theory. Every detail is documented. It was confirmed by a presidential commission. It was apologized for by the President of the United States and the Secretary of State in 2010. And yet, most people have never heard of it. Between 1946 and 1948, American government doctors traveled to Guatemala. They were not there to heal. They were there to deliberately infect human beings with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid, without telling them, without their consent, on purpose. This is the Guatemala syphilis experiments, and the vault is now open. To understand why American researchers went to Guatemala, you need to understand what they could not do at home. 1944. World War II is raging. Sexually transmitted diseases are devastating the U.S. military. The Public Health Service needs to test a syphilis prophylactic, something to stop the disease from taking hold after exposure. To test it, they need to deliberately infect people. They tried in a prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. They failed. Consistently infecting prisoners proved, in their own words, unreliable. So they looked elsewhere. Dr. Juan Funes, head of Guatemala's Venereal Disease Control Division, extended an invitation. Guatemala had what Indiana did not: a government willing to cooperate in silence, a prison where sex workers already visited inmates, a psychiatric hospital full of patients who could not object, soldiers who could be ordered to participate, and no free press asking questions. In the fall of 1946, Dr. John Charles Cutler arrived in Guatemala City, 30 years old, fully funded by the National Institutes of Health, approved by the Surgeon General of the United States, with a list of people he planned to infect. What Cutler and his team did over the next 2 years is among the most documented acts of medical cruelty in American history. Their own reports describe exactly what they did, in clinical language that makes it more disturbing, not less. The first experiments took place in Guatemala City's central prison. Sex workers who tested positive for syphilis were brought in to have intercourse with inmates. The inmates were not told the women were infected, but results were inconsistent. So Cutler changed his method. In a report still held at the U.S. National Archives, he describes moistening a cotton swab with gonorrhea bacteria and inserting it directly into the genitals of subjects, quote, with considerable vigor. When sexual contact proved too slow, they moved to direct inoculation. His team created artificial wounds on subjects' bodies and rubbed infected material directly into the cuts. In other cases, they injected syphilis bacteria into the spine, the eyes, the urethra, and the rectum. One psychiatric patient was infected with syphilis 8 separate times over 1 year, using different methods each time. He is referred to only by a patient number in the documents. He never knew what was being done to him. When the experiments moved fully into the psychiatric hospital, any pretense of consent vanished entirely. These were patients who could not speak for themselves, could not understand what was happening, could not ask for help. The scale matters. More than 5,500 people were enrolled in the study programs. At least 1,300 were deliberately infected. Of those, only around 700 received treatment. The remaining 600 were left, infected, some of them for years. The victims were chosen precisely because they were powerless. Prisoners, mental patients, soldiers ordered to cooperate, orphans, sex workers, indigenous Guatemalans with no political voice. And here is the detail that is almost impossible to accept. In 1946, while Cutler was in Guatemala deliberately spreading syphilis, his supervisor, Dr. John Mahoney, received the Lasker Award, the most prestigious prize in American medicine. He won it for discovering that penicillin could cure syphilis. The man overseeing the experiments was being celebrated as a hero of medicine for treating the disease his team was deliberately spreading. In the same year, at the same time, When Cutler returned to the United States in 1948, he wrote his reports, completed in 1952 and 1955. Then buried. The results were never published in any medical journal. The data was never shared. The experiments simply disappeared, not destroyed, just never mentioned again. Cutler went on to become a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. He continued defending the Tuskegee syphilis experiments until his death in 2003. His supervisor became chairman of the World Health Organization. The Surgeon General who approved the funding became a university dean. They all lived celebrated lives. They died with their reputations intact. And the people they infected in Guatemala, the prisoners, the soldiers, the psychiatric patients, the orphans, received nothing. Not treatment, not acknowledgement, not compensation. For 60 years, the United States government knew what had been done and said nothing. In 2005, historian Susan Reverby was researching the Tuskegee experiments at the University of Pittsburgh. While going through archived boxes belonging to Dr. Cutler, she found something unexpected. Thousands of pages and photographs under a cover page that read, "Experimental Studies on Human Inoculation in Syphilis, Gonorrhea, and Chancroid." She spent 5 years carefully studying the documents. In October 2010, the story broke. President Obama called the Guatemalan president personally to apologize. Secretary of State Clinton issued a formal statement calling the experiments clearly unethical. A presidential commission reviewed over 125,000 pages of documents and published a report titled "Ethically Impossible." Guatemala called it a crime against humanity. Multiple lawsuits were filed on behalf of victims and their descendants. Every single one was dismissed. As of today, not one victim has received $1 in compensation from the United States government. John Cutler died in 2003. 7 years before the world found out what he had done. He never apologized. The psychiatric patients he infected, the ones infected 8 times with syphilis, who could not speak or object, their names are not in the public record. We know their patient numbers. That is all. The U.S. government apologized in 2010. The courts rejected every lawsuit. The money never came. This is not a story about monsters. These were doctors with degrees and salaries and awards. The Guatemala experiments did not happen because of evil people. They happened because a government decided that some lives were worth less than a research result. Once. And if it happened once, the only question worth asking is how many times did it happen that we still do not know about? The vault for the Guatemala syphilis experiments is now locked, but the next secret is already waiting. Subscribe to enter the vault. My name is Jack. Keep your eyes open.